In order to be able to know the correspondence of an event that took place during the 6 days of creation and where that occurs later on in the corresponding millennium. In other words, if something happened on day 4 of creation, what does that correspond to in the course of the 4th millennium? To make that calculation, you require two things. Number one, you have to know at what time in the day a specific event occurred. When God made the animals, what time on day 5 was that? If you don't know what time, there's no way to work at the correspondence, right? It's sometime in the course of 24 hours, right? If 1 hour is equals to a specific period of time, then you could be off by a lot of years in the end, right? And the second thing you have to know is what is the corresponding period of time. If 1 hour is an hour during the 6 days of creation, what does that correspond to in the course of the millennium, right? So there's 2 points that have to be established and worked out to come to a conclusion about the connection of the events of creation to historical events later on in time, right? And the first one is more difficult to figure out. The second one is quite simple. It's a simple mathematical proportion. All you have to do is divide 1,000 years by 24 hours in a day, divide 1,000 years by 24, and you get 41.66 years, which means that 1 hour during the course of Maaseh Bereshis corresponds to a period of time of 41 years and 8 months. Now, there's 1 hour corresponds to this 4 decades, a little more than 4 decades, and it means that whatever happened in the course of that hour can happen anywhere in the course of those 41.66 years. That's the simple correlation. The truth is, that's not entirely accurate, even though, as the Ramban points out and says, that each day of Maaseh Bereshis was 24 hours long. The reality is, in terms of this specific calculation of correlation, we don't work with the number 24, because since we're trying to correlate events that occurred, creations that actually happened, we have to deal with the period of time only during which God actually created. So Chazal, when the rabbis explained that God did no creating at nighttime, all the creation of Maaseh Bereshis occurred during the daytime hours, during 12 hours of the day, right, not the nighttime hours, and therefore you divide 1,000 by 12 instead. As it says in the Leshem, in Pirkei, the Rabbi Elazar, it says that 1 day for the Holy One, blessed is He, corresponds to 12 hours of the day. Since no creating occurred at night, as it says in Bereshis Rabbah, therefore 1 hour of a day of creation corresponds to 83 years and 4 months in the course of a single millennium. In other words, if you're dividing 1,000 by 12, it comes out to be 81.33 years, meaning that 1 hour is a much larger period of time. Correspondingly, the 1 hour corresponds to 81 years and 4 months. That's considered to be the correlation over here. In other words, though each day of creation was 24 hours long and consisted of a night and day, for the sake of this relationship of 1 day to 1,000 years, we deal with a 12-hour day. In fact, the verse that describes the completion of creation reads as follows: "The heavens and the earth were completed with all of their components." In the Hebrew, it begins with the word Vayechu. This is a very common pasuk, a verse, because we say it every Friday night at Kiddush. Vayechu Shemayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am. Because Baruch created all of the heavens and the earth and all their heavenly hosts, basically, right? And the word Vayechulu is written chasr. In other words, it's supposed to have a vav in the middle and towards the end. And in the Torah, any time a letter is missing or added for some reason, usually comes for drush, especially when it's chaser. So the word vayechulu is not written male, it's missing the first vav, even though it reads exactly the same way. And therefore, as the Rokech points out, there's a reason for that. What's the drush? The drush is the gematria of vayechulu, when you add it up, is equal to 72. Why 72? Because we're talking about God completing creation, and he says Vayechulu is equal to 6 days times 12 daylight hours. So again, we have a confirmation that 12 hours is the period of time that we're working with. Therefore, recalculating 1,000 years divided by 12 means that 1 hour creation corresponds to a period of 83.33 years, and the 6th millennium would break down as follows: 5,000 to 5083.33, or 1240 to 1323.33. So Ian, you can make the whole calculation, lay out all the 12 hours basically, And we'll see why that's important. However, when it comes to knowing precisely what event took place at what time during the 6 days of creation, the Torah is quiet. The Torah does not tell us an hour by hour, recording of what God did when. It tells us in general terms. On day one, God created the light and divided the day, from the night and the separation over here. On day two, God divided the waters, right? Upper waters, lower waters. On day three, God made the grass and the trees and things like that. And day four, the sun, the moon, the stars were put into their places, right? It doesn't tell you at what time God did it. There was no construction schedule over here where God said, it's 4 o'clock, time to put the sun in its place. 5 o'clock, time for the moon to go where it's supposed to go. And the stars, it doesn't say that, right? So we're back to square one over here, right? The events of the day are detailed, but not the particular hour during which it occurred. Thus, though the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil occurred during the 6th day of creation, we do not know during which hour on the 6th day, from the Torah at least, that Adam and Chava ate, right? And the mistake of even a single hour can translate into an error of 83.33 years. If you assume that he ate in the 8th hour and he ate in the 10th hour, you're off by 166 years. If you're trying to figure out the moment that Mashiach might come, and you base it upon what the events of the Chumash, because Mashiach's coming is totally rooted in the 6 days of creation, the last possible moment he can come is connected to events of the 6th day of creation, or any time, but certainly we're now holding the 6 millennium, so the 6th day is our period of time, right? It's got to be somehow rooted there, the last possible time, right? If you make a calculation, well, I think it happened in the 8th hour, and it really happened in the 10th hour, or vice versa. I think it happened in the 10th hour, and it really happened in the 8th hour. You're off by 160 some odd years. That's a lot of time to be off by in terms of calculating the arrival of anything, in the end. So it's a problem, right? However, right, fortunately, and for reasons not explained in the Talmud, there is one day, right, of the entire 6 days, that we do know what happened hour by hour. And it happens to be Yom Shishi, the 6th day of creation. How convenient, right? So, here's what the Gemara says. Sanhedrin Lamechet Amud Beis 38b says the following thing. Rabbi Yochanan ben Chanina said, the 6th day consists of 12 hours. In the first hour, dust was gathered. In the second, it was kneaded into a shape. In the third, his limbs were formed. In the fourth, a soul was infused into him. In the fifth, he arose and stood on his feet. It's a lot of work for one day, but not for God, because it's all quite simple for him. In the sixth, he gave the animals their names. That's right there in the Chumash itself. In the seventh, Chava became his mate. Very quick shidduch when God makes shidduchim, right? In the eighth, they ascended to bed as 2 and descended as 4. Now his Cain and his twin sister were born. In the 9th, he was commanded not to eat from the 8th of Das Tovara. In the 10th hour, he sinned. Nisrach. So, if your kids can't remember from the beginning of the day until the end of the day what to do or not to do, there's precedent over here. Within 1 hour, Adam made the mistake of violating the commandment that he was given from God, not to eat from the 8th of Das Tovara. So Kabbalah explains that time was somewhat different before the Chet as opposed to after the Chet. The 1 hour, it was really a lot more time in the end, but that's a different discussion unto itself. Right? In the 11th hour, says the Gemara, he was judged, and in the 12th hour, he was expelled from the Garden of Eden. But the Medrash explains, and we hold like this, that Adam still remained anyhow in Gan Eden over Shabbos and left, in fact, Motzei Shabbos instead. So, now we can return, right, to the table and track down the 10th hour of the 6th day of history, in the 6th millennium. And it turns out that the hour, the historical hour, that Adam Harishon ate from the 8th of Das Tovara, which transformed and changed all of history, was the 10th hour of day 6. And that corresponds to a period of 83.3 years that happened to have begun in the year 5750 or 1990, right? Which means that for the first time in all of history, because as we said before, all of history is about tikkun, rectification. We've always been working on rectifying the chet of Adam Rishon. Everybody in every generation at all times, and all the events and all the episodes of history, it's all part of the same idea, to rectify the chet of Adam Rishon. But we're the first generation, as of 1990, 5750, to enter a period of time that corresponds to when Adam HaRishon ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, meaning that as of 1990, 5750, history turned a very, very dramatic corner. Very dramatic corner. Right now we're holding 5770, right, which is 2009, almost 2010. That would mean that we are living today, it's 20 years since 1990, we are 20 years into an 83.33 year period of time that corresponds to the all-important moment when Adam HaRishon made the mistake of eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. That has to have some kind of significance historically, right? So, this means that since 1990, history should have been affected by some sort of spiritual undercurrent that corresponds to the episode of the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. According to Kabbalah, the events of today should be the projection of events of back then, right? The question is, what, if anything, at all happened around the year 1990 that resembles a modern-day version of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra? Because that's the correlation. The energy of the 6th millennium at that time has to be a reflection of the energy of day 6 at that time corresponding, right? So the truth is many things have happened before, during, and after the year 1990 that can be better understood in light of this remarkable explanation. And that will be discussed later on. But one event in particular occurred precisely at that time, something that literally changed the course of history in an unparalleled way that keeps pushing mankind to new heights while at the same time creating major tests. It is a veritable tree of knowledge for good, absolutely, for the amount of useful information, including the spreading of Torah. It's unprecedented, at least in modern times. I mean, we'll see. For evil, beyond imagination, this thing, whatever we're talking about, right? It's good is indescribable. I mean, who has not benefited? The amount of knowledge that you can gain from this thing, right? For evil, it's also beyond imagination, because there's always going to be a counterbalance between good and evil over here, right? To such an extent that the rabbis of our time had to address the issue, as the societies of the world itself. I mean, in Time magazine, they also spoke about the need to curb this particular thing. A coincidence, which we don't believe in, right? That the World Wide Web went public at this time. There's a history over here. Turns out that even though they were working on it for quite a long time, it did not become public until, all of a sudden, for some reason unknown to mankind, except for the fact that technology advances and who knows what day it's going to be ready. But historically, from a Kabbalistic point of view, it's because it's rooted back in the 6 days of creation. The internet, the World Wide Web, a modern-day version of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, came into existence precisely corresponding to the hour that Adam HaRishon actually ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. So just summing up, right? 6,000 years of history. We're holding right now in 5770, right? 230 years left until the year 6000. Not a lot of time. Still more than we want from Mashiach to arrive, right? But 20 years already into a period of time that corresponds to the moment or to the hour during which Adam HaRishon made the fateful mistake of eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, which must mean something very significant in terms of our period of history, and certainly has a lot to say about what's going on and where things are heading.